Hey, thanks for choosing Gracegate this morning. There's heaps of other things you could be doing right now. There's some really good series on Netflix that I've been going through, and I'm sure you'd agree with me. So just that you've chosen this time to be with us is really meaningful for us as a community. And more than that, I hope that the time that we spend together, if not already, that God maybe just whispers something into your ear, or most importantly, into your heart this morning. So before we start, I just caught again my eye, and I cannot not welcome back Mr. and Mrs. Edgerton. Can we give them a hand? I don't know if you guys know, but you guys are loved in our community, and it's been a bit boring without you guys, without the life that Bree brings and the dry humor that Blair brings. But welcome back, guys. You were missed, and yeah, we value that you guys are back. So we've been speaking about shifting gears, and if you joined us for the first time today, I'm going to give you a quick summary of sort of what we've been addressing. And the whole thing of shifting gears is basically that I guess all of us believe we're not where we want to be. We're here, and actually maybe we actually want to be over here. And basically we see that God actually always wants us to move ahead, to actually go further, faster, to move forward. And as a community, as a church, this is something that is at our heart, because we believe that actually everyone's welcome here, everyone's accepted, but God doesn't just want us to remain the same as we enter these doors. He actually wants us to grow in our faith, to grow in our relationship with Him. And so we've been speaking about a few things that are really practical and that actually require our participation. It requires our intentionality. It is stuff that's proactive. It's not that God necessarily just does for us, but we actually have to respond and do something. And so the first week we looked at, as a church, one of the things we want to be known for is actually connecting. We want to connect. And I just want to thank those who I've actually seen connecting, who've come and said, hey, I actually want to move out of my comfort zone and connect with someone I haven't been connecting with. And I've seen that, and thank you for that, because it makes a difference. And everything that we do actually makes a difference. So the first week we looked at We Connect, and last week we looked at what? Who can help me out? Serve, all right? We serve. And we looked at the value of serving and sort of how Jesus phrased it, because the disciples, the guys who were following Him all around, were getting it wrong all the time, and they were saying, hey, we want to be great. We want to be great. We want to be at your side, Jesus. And then Jesus would say to them, hey, you can be great. You can be great, but the way you actually be great is to actually serve. And we looked at a quote by Martin Luther King Jr. who said, actually, everybody can be great because everybody can serve. So it doesn't discriminate against anyone. And so whether you believe in God or you don't believe in God, and you find yourself here this morning, I hope that you can sort of just see a glimpse this morning of who we believe God is, and also as a community, what we're hoping our church can be. So, to start off today, Jordan already shared, but we're speaking about this topic of we give, all right? So, just to start off, if you can just whip out your phone, go to your bank app, and I'll give you the details of Gracegate, and then, I'll just tell you the figure. Is that okay? No? All right. We won't do that. But to start off this morning, close your eyes, all right? Do me a favor. Close your eyes, and don't think about the person next to you or anything. Hold your wallets, all right? Because you'd never know who's sitting next to you this morning. Close your eyes, and I want you to think of a time where you were on the receiving end of someone's generosity, all right? Think of a time when you were on the receiving end of someone's generosity. And it could have been this morning, it could have been just this past week, it could have been a couple months ago, maybe years, maybe it's a significant defining moment in your life. But think a bit about you were on that receiving end of someone's generosity, all right? And just for yourself, just think for yourself, what were some of the emotions that were going through your mind or your heart as you embraced this gift, whatever it was? So just keep thinking about that for a few seconds. There could be numerous times where that has happened. And then I want you to think now also, still with your eyes closed, I want you to think, imagine whoever that person was or whatever organization it was, whatever. Imagine life without that generosity or without that gift. Now, it may not have made a significant difference. It may have been like, oh, it wouldn't have made actually a huge impact. But just imagine what would life have looked like without that small, maybe it was a small gesture, maybe it was something big. But now think broader. Think a bit about our church community. Think about your family. Think about, imagine if there was a void of generosity in our family. How would that look? Think about maybe our church community. Think about our schools. Think about our country. Think about the world. What happens when there is a void of generosity? And just think briefly, quickly about some of the emotions and some of the feelings that may be stirring inside of your mind and your thoughts when you think about that stuff. Cool. You can open your eyes. Generosity, I'm sure no one will disagree with me that it makes a difference. That it actually has the power to make a huge difference. And if you don't remember anything that I shared today, the best way I think I can share generosity with you happened to me last week. Last weekend, Zalia's niece and nephew, who are I think 5 and 3, came to visit. And at Grace Kids, and this is exactly why the kids should be in Grace Kids Church, because they got these goodie bags, all right? And in these goodie bags, there were 3 lollies. And I didn't know how many lollies were in them, but after church last week, Zalia's niece, India, came up to me, and she had her bag there, and she pulled out one of the lollies in the bag, and she gave it to me, all right? Which my response was this: oh, thanks. Cool. And I didn't really think much about it, right? And then later on that day, I saw a goodie bag still at home, and then I saw there was one lolly in it, and I said, oh, Zols, can I have this lolly? And she said, no, don't be crazy. Like, she knows exactly how many lollies are in there. I'm like, nah, she wouldn't, because she just gave me one, right? Like, I mean, she probably doesn't value even what she gave away, right? And then later on, India came to Zalia and she said, oh, where's my lolly? I've got 1 left and Hudson's got 2 left. And so she knew exactly how much he has. And I thought that is a beautiful picture of what generosity looks like, what we give looks like. Because sometimes, we give and maybe we receive and we don't think that it's, it's impacted someone, but actually it might have actually cost them. It's something that they've actually given up. So that's just a glimpse. If you forget everything, just remember that story and practice that. Do more of it. Give lollies away, and we'll be rocking as a church. All right. So we give. I want to ask us this question this morning, and it is this: what do we want our community to know us by? All right. We listened to a podcast a couple of weeks ago with the staff team, and they were sharing, hey, if someone was wearing a Gracegate t-shirt like this, and they were in the countdown, and some strangers just saw Gracegate, and the one said, oh, they're from Gracegate, what would they say about us? What are some of the conversations that they would say about us, and sort of what would we as a community, what would we love people to say about us? What would we love people to say when they see that, hey, they hear we're Jesus followers? What would we love them to actually say about us? Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff that people say about us, all right? A whole bunch of stuff. Not just as Gracegate, but as Christians. And I can agree with a lot of that stuff because, man, we have often got it wrong, what following Jesus is about. But what do we, as a community, as a church, what are some of the things we hope people will be saying about us? And I think some of them would be like, we've actually been sharing, like, man, oh yeah, the guys at Gracegate, those are the guys that connect. Those are the guys who actually have time for people. Those are the guys who actually serve. They serve. They just serve each other. They value each other and they serve each other. And today I want to share and hope that one of the things that they will share about us is that, oh, Gracegate, those are the guys who are generous. Those are that community, they have mind-blowing generosity. They give. They just give. They give. They make a difference. I found this quote this week, and this is what this guy says about generosity. He says, generosity is now the best apologetic we have to a watching and needy world. In other words, he says, hey, the church should be defined, all right? It's defined by so many things. People say so much stuff about the church. But he says, hey, the church, generosity is now the best apologetic. In other words, it's the best defense. It's the best thing for us is that, hey, the church is seen as generous, that they're actually helping out. Because people are actually looking and seeing Christians and they're wondering, oh, are all these stories true? So my hope is that we can be a church that is generous. Now, one of the things about a generous church is that in order to be a generous church, guess what we have to do? Give you a hint. Yeah? We give, right? We have to give. And I don't know about you guys, but this is kind of hard, all right? This is actually kind of hard. This just doesn't come natural. This doesn't come natural for me to just give. It is something that I think, we have to wrestle with the tension inside of us. And often it will come up like, and it could be in the context of our time. It could be in the context of finances. But sometimes I think we struggle with we give. And as a community, as a church, we're not alone. Because the story I want to share with you today is about Paul. And I've spoken about Paul a number of times here at church. And Paul was a guy who was completely against Christians, all right? He was completely against Christians. His living was actually to go and persecute Christians and to actually take them out, all right? To literally take them out and kill them. And he has this encounter with Jesus. He has this time where he actually turns his whole life around and he actually becomes a Christian, all right? He becomes a follower of God. And not only that, Paul is actually known as the person who actually was the person who actually spread the good news about Jesus the most and went and started churches, in other words, gatherings of people all around the world. And today I want to share about a time when Paul actually goes to a church, and it was a church in Corinth, and he's actually at this church, and he's trying to encourage this mindset, and not only a mindset, but a lifestyle of generosity amongst the church people. So if you're not a church person, if you're not a Jesus follower, hey, you're off the hook today. You don't have to listen to anything. This doesn't apply to you. If you are a Jesus follower, this applies to you. And just see through this story the significance of what happens when this church actually practices generosity. We're all good? Still all with me? All right, so the text is found in 2 Corinthians, and this is how it starts. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. All right, yes, Paul, he's teaching to the church in Corinth, all these believers. And if you study the books of Corinthians, you will see that this was a no perfect people church, all right? They were getting it wrong over and over and over again. They were messing up over and over and over again. There was so much chaos in these churches. Paul comes along. He's challenging on this topic of generosity. And he says, hey, I want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. These were newer churches. These were churches that had only been established not as long as the churches he was teaching to. And he says, hey, I want you guys to just know about the grace, about the blessing, about the gift that God has actually given these churches in Macedonia. So he goes on, and he says, in the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. All right? Now, that's a whole bunch of stuff there that is mind-blowing. I'm going to try and unpack it, all right? Listen to this. Paul sharing to this church who pretty much aren't giving. He's saying, hey, I want to encourage you. I want to show you what God is sort of giving his grace on the Macedonian churches. And listen to this, all right? This is what the Macedonian churches were doing. He says, in the midst of a very severe trial, all right? In other words, in the midst of a storm, in the midst when everything isn't going right with this church, in the midst of chaos. And Paul, I was like, why didn't Paul just use the word trial, right? We would have got it. We would have got it if he just said trial. But yeah, he says in the midst of a severe trial. Not only a severe trial, but he says in a very severe trial, all right? He's showing, hey, I want to amplify just how crazy this story is, what was happening here. He says, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty, check here, it welled up. Now, honestly, if you've been through some rough storms in your life, if you've got so much going on in your life, when there's trials going on in your life, in the midst of this, it would be okay for us to say, hey, you know, their joy, it flowed out. You know, it started leaking, started escaping. But yeah, Paul shares and he says, hey, in this current time, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty, not just poverty, their extreme poverty. In other words, this wasn't a community of people that were wealthy. They were struggling just to survive in life. He says, hey, it welled up in rich generosity. Wow. He goes on. He says, for I testify that they gave as much as they were able. He says, look, I'm an eyewitness. I'm coming to you guys because I saw this with my own eyes. They gave as much as they were able. To which the church in Corinth would have probably been like, oh yeah, we give as much as we're able to give, you know, that's okay. But then Paul goes on and he says, and even beyond their ability. And even beyond their ability. Man, think about this. Paul's encouraging, hey, if you really want to make a difference as a church community, I want you to look at this church over here. Even when they didn't have much, they were giving not only what they were able to, all right, but even beyond their ability. He says entirely on their own. No one was holding a gun at their head. No one was saying, hey, you have to do this. No, he was encouraging this, and they were entirely doing this on their own. It goes on, and he says this, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in the service to the Lord's people. Love this. Love this. This is what church is. Here are these guys in their poverty. In their poverty, they say, hey, they pleaded with Paul. They pleaded with the guys and they said, hey, even in our poverty, look, we want to give. We want to give. We want to be in service of the Lord's people, all the others. Now, what's fascinating about this story is that the Macedonian church was actually a lot of Gentiles who had actually become Christians, all right? In other words, it was new churches, it was unbelievers, it was Greeks who had become Christians and followers of the way, followers of Jesus. Whereas these churches that they were actually helping out were the old churches, were the Jewish churches, were the guys who actually were in it for so long and were probably much wealthier. But yeah, the church that is least wealthy is saying, hey, we're pleading with you. We want to be a part of this. We want to make a difference. Please, we want to give. We want to serve. We want to be generous. Doesn't this blow your mind? And then it goes on. Paul says, and they exceeded our expectations. They exceeded our expectations. Wouldn't it be awesome if our community knew us like everything that they asked or even that they didn't ask, we exceeded their expectations? If they heard, oh, the church is going to help out, we just we went the extra mile and we even exceeded their expectations even more. Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that make even a bigger difference? He says they gave themselves, and I love this part because this gives us the foundation of where this generosity came from. It says they gave themselves first of all to the Lord. You see, there's something significant about when you actually grasp and you see the grace, the generosity, the love that God has given to us. There is something then that wells up inside of us that gives us purpose and meaning and actually says, hey, we want to be part of this also. We want to be part of this. This is why they said, hey, we've actually tasted and seen what God has done in our lives. We can't not give. We can't not be generous. And this was their extraordinary act of love. Paul goes on then. And he says, so we urged Titus, and Titus was pretty much also one of the followers of Jesus. And he went around and actually collected all the money because they didn't have any banking apps back in the day. Someone actually had to go from church to church and actually collect all the funds and actually walk and journey so that the others could receive it. So he said, so we urged Titus, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part. I love what Paul's sharing. He's saying this act of what? Of grace. Of grace, right? He's saying that this church's generosity, he's saying this church is actually them coming together and saying, hey, we want to actually give and give financially. This was all in the context of finances. He says, hey, I want to see this as an act of grace. Because that's what generosity is, right? So why wouldn't we as a church, if we have a name entitled Gracegate, why wouldn't we want to be a community that lives out generosity? An author that I was reading this week, he shared, we wrestle with life's biggest questions often. Like, what is the purpose of my life, right? How many times have you asked yourself that question? Or where do I find meaning in my life? And he said, what happens if the answer to that question could be as simple as one word entitled generosity? What happens if we just lived out generosity and we practiced that, and that's where we could find the most purposeful, the most meaningful life? Paul goes on then, and he says, but since you excel in everything, he's saying, hey, this is a church he's speaking to. He's saying, you guys are excelling in everything. And he lists them. He says, in faith, like you guys have faith. You trust in God. You believe in God. In speech, like you guys are good in encouraging others. In knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love we have kindled in you. He's saying, hey, you guys are knocking this out the park. This is awesome. And then he says, hey, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. In this grace of giving. Love, again, he's phrasing generosity in the context of grace. He's saying, hey, it's a gift. It's an unmerited favor. We don't deserve it, but we receive it. He says, hey, make sure that you guys also excel in this. And then he does sort of the punchline where he shares this. He says, I'm not commanding you, all right? Not commanding you guys, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. Wow. Paul was telling the church, he's saying, hey guys, I'm not commanding you guys to do this, but I actually just want to test how sincere your love is by looking at other churches and by showing you what others are doing. He says, hey, I thought about this and I thought, often people say, if you want to know what's going on in my life, you want to know someone, well, then there's two things that you need to do. You need to check their schedule and you need to check their bank account, and you'll know what they value in life, what they really value in life. Paul says, yeah, hey, I'm not commanding you. And then he ends it like this. He says, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you, through his poverty, might become rich. I'm going to read that again. He says, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. It's like, hey, you guys know this. It's not as if you don't know this, all right? We've been speaking about this forever. He's saying, you guys know this. And though he was rich, Jesus Christ, although he was rich, although he had everything that he could possibly imagine, he was a king. He had all authority. But yet for your sake, he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich. I love this, because this is what the good news is. This is what church is all about. It's us seeing that God is for us. It's us seeing that God's grace wants to come over us, not in a condemning way, but in a way that actually raises us up. He empties his bank account so that our bank account can be filled. He pays the price so that we can get in. That's what he's saying here. He's saying, hey, and this riches that Jesus was giving, this is freedom. This richness is forgiveness. This is meaning. This is purpose. This is an unconditional love. That's what it brings to our lives. It brings contentment. Imagine if we were defined as a church who was, Grace Gate, that community, those are the guys who become poor so that they can make others rich. Imagine that. Love that. That's the gospel. Not only financially, but with our time. And what about with our words? I mean, it's so easy to give words. What about if we gave encouraging words? And those guys are so generous with their words. The way they just encourage people, the way they push people ahead in life. Wouldn't that be awesome to be a church that continuously is defined by we give? Jesus also summed it up like this. He's with his disciples and he's outside the temple, and I'll just share this quick story. It says Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put, and he watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. So he's watching people. He's saying, hey, who's putting money in? I don't know why. Is he stalking people? I don't think so. Because believe it or not, God's not really concerned about how much money you give him, all right? He isn't. That's the truth. And yeah, he says many rich people threw in large amounts, right? There were rich people, and probably back in that day, they probably wanted everyone to know about it. He goes on and he says, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. So yeah, the rich people, they're bringing all their money, they're putting it down. Yeah, this old widow lady, she comes along, she takes 2 coins which were only worth a few cents, and she puts them in. And then Jesus calls his disciples, the guys who follow him. He says this, calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, Truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. And I can just see Peter putting up his hand here. One of the guys who follow him is like, no, Jesus, you've got this wrong. You got this wrong. I saw some other rich people, they brought heaps more. Sorry, Jesus, you got this wrong. But Jesus says, yeah, hey, I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. And then he says this, they all gave out of their wealth, but she out of her, and again that word, poverty, out of her poverty, putting everything, all she had to live on. Man, how meaningful. That's the gospel right there. That's what Jesus' followers do. That's what we're encouraged to do. That's what our identity rests on. Is that, hey, if we are actually going to be Jesus' followers, then we need to be a church that is generous. That is generous. So how do we do this? Maybe you're sitting here today and you're thinking, oh man, I really hope that person's listening today, because I really want them to, do something about this, because they're so not generous. But each and every one of us, I want all of us to listen to this today, myself included, whether you're a believer or not a believer, because I honestly believe that generosity can shift so many things in your life. Being generous can change so many things in your life if you just become someone who lives a generous life. And the thing about being generous as well is that anyone can do it. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter where you're from, it doesn't even matter how much you have or how much you don't have. Each and every one of us can practice generosity. And that's why this is for all of us as a church community. I want to challenge us today, because it's cool to know all this stuff, and that's what I think Paul was sharing with the church in Corinth. But he says, hey, the meaning, the substance, the actual result that we see when we are generous is how it transforms, how it actually makes a difference in people's lives. Now, I know that this church is a generous church. I've seen it. I've been here long enough to see that, man, because of people's generosity, and I'm speaking firstly financially, we actually have this building, we have this community. We're able to offer so many different programs to our community and actually see things change in people's lives. I love that we're a generous church. I love also that we're generous with our time. I see people, and it flows on from what we spoke about last week when we spoke about serving, who give and just give of their time sacrificially. They give up some stuff that they really want to actually go to, but they see, hey, more value in being a presence here and making a difference in someone else's life. And also in encouraging. I think all of us can get better at being generous with our words. I mean, we're generous with our words when, it's those words, right? But why can't we be generous with our words when it comes to encouraging, when it comes to lifting people up, when it comes to moving people forward? Today, in whatever context you find yourself, I want to encourage us to actually start practicing generosity more, because it actually takes intentionality. We can walk out here today and we can say, oh, that was pretty good hearing all of that. Man, that church did amazing things. But if all of us actually took our next step in the context of generosity, or we give, imagine the difference we can make. One of us can make a good difference. Two of us can make a bigger difference. But imagine if all of us just practiced generosity. I think it's a habit that, it'll be awesome to continuously raise the next generation in actually, hey, you need to become generous. And that's why I love the story of Zalia's niece, because that's such a great picture of what generosity is. And the Bible has so much good stuff in it that actually teaches on these things. And one of them is to be a percentage giver. And it's actually that, hey, whatever you receive, that you actually give a percentage of that back and you be generous with that. And in the context that Jesus taught about it, it was called the tithe. It was called the 10%. That actually, hey, whatever I've received, it's not mine in any case. If you're a Jesus follower, we just believe everything that we've been blessed with is from God. But actually that a 10%, hey, everything that comes in, the first fruits, the 10%, I'm actually going to give back. And I'm giving this back so that I can just practice being generous. So I can actually see that, hey, this little bit is going to make a difference. And the cool thing about it is that it's easy for all of us to do this. All of us can do this. It doesn't matter how old we are or how much we have. All of us can practice percentage giving. So I want to encourage all of us today to actually do that. To do that. Become a percentage giver. When you go home today, think about it. Speak with your friends about it. And see, hey, how can I become a percentage giver? How can I practice generosity more? And maybe it's not that you have to be a percentage giver and actually give it to this organization, Gracegate. Maybe you find another organization and you think, hey, I think my finances would actually do much greater deal in another organization. Whatever, just do it. Because generosity, and we all know this, it's nothing new, does actually more for you than it does for the organization. There's so much value in being a church that gives. God, today, I thank you that you've given everything for us, God. And I thank you that I'm surrounded by a community and people here who see the value of generosity. God, I know that there's some of us here today who you want to actually shift gears with us. You want to say, hey, I think you need to take your next step in faith and trust me more and trust me specifically with finances, God. And if you're speaking to someone today, I pray, God, that in a way you can just help them to make a decision that will be life-giving, that will show them, hey, there's so much value in being a generous person. If it's finances, if it's time, if it's words, whatever it is, God, I thank you that you're a God who loves us unconditionally, and I pray that we can continue to be a generous church, that if people define us, they'll say, hey, those are the people who actually just give and they serve, and the reason they do that is because they've experienced that love and that generosity from Jesus Christ. So we thank you for speaking to our hearts, and I pray that you'll speak to our minds so that we can put this into practice, God. In Jesus' name, amen.